Hello, Bridge Women. My name is Diane Down, and I want to tell you a little bit more about myself as we head into session 2 here. I will be married 30 years this summer. I have 3 adult children, 1 daughter married, and I told you in my last video that 1 daughter had to postpone her wedding till next year because of the pandemic, so that we can welcome her international guests across our borders. And my son will be heading off to university this fall. I am a part-time sessional university instructor, and I am an entrepreneur with a few irons in the fire, coaching leaders in churches and nonprofits and businesses, really on creating curious, robust coaching cultures. My leadership skills were largely developed in church settings over the last 30 years, both creating programs, writing curriculum, recruiting, retaining, training volunteers. And then several years ago, I went back to university and got a master's degree in leadership. My current leadership context is I attend the Kamloops Alliance Church with my husband. We've been there for 12 years. That context is a church of about 950, 23 staff members. We have 3 services, or we did have 3 services. British Columbia is maintaining restrictions of gatherings no more than 50. So we're in the middle of trying to figure out how to best utilize our space to maximize that gathering number, especially how we could do unique entrances and exits. So perhaps we could have more than 150 people on the property at a time, but in different meeting spaces, just as I'm sure your church is doing the same thing right now. Where I'm doing volunteer project work at my church is I'm similar to this. I'm designing and creating online content. I've done devotionals. I'm designing and creating online content for virtual prayer rooms that we're running that kind of tag onto our sermon series. I was doing some missional engagement facilitation with our congregation, leadership development for our apprentices, like our interns, and leading renewal worship nights, just a variety of different things that have to do with leadership and training. So this is part 2 of our training time together. In our last session, we examined our current situation through the lens of Nehemiah and his journey through lament. Today's focus will be on developing our emotional intelligence and keeping our why in front of us, the 2 things that are going to sustain us in the midst of loss. So to review, I'm guessing there are a few of you who didn't do the lament exercise provided for your notes for session 1, maybe because it seemed awkward or you weren't in the mood. We can be afraid of sorrow or expressing sorrow because it feels so big, and attending to sadness, frankly, is inconvenient. We've got stuff to do. And other than being given permission to cry, we really haven't been well equipped to integrate sadness into our spiritual practices. My purpose in giving you that exercise was to introduce you to a process called examine. Really just in its simplest form, it's taking an inventory of your thoughts and your emotions and how those impact your behavior. You may be wondering, how do I go forward emotionally? I mean, the show must go on, but my emotional tail is still wagging the dog. I want to tell you a little story about moving on before lamenting. I think I mentioned in my first video that both my daughters lost their university graduations. And I was really sad about that. They had worked so hard and a celebration was in order. So thinking that we could bless them, my husband and I planned a surprise graduation party. It was our first takeout food since lockdown happened. I was so excited about that. We got helium balloons, we decorated the house a little bit. We even wrote up our own diplomas with a joke degree name on there. We had a lot of fun planning this party. We found some really funky pomp and circumstance, electronica music that we thought would add some humor to the situation. And we even hired a photographer to do some front porch distancing for photography, all COVID appropriate. So the girls arrived, and when I told them that the photographer was coming, one daughter went straight to the bathroom and was kind of upset and crying. So bad she got blotchy in the neck. The other daughter was just kind of quiet and a little flustered. Even though you'd never know it by the pictures that we took, emotionally they were not okay. By the end of the evenings, after some family time and eating and playing some family games, things had calmed a bit, but it was not the celebration that I thought we were going to have. The next morning, I did some processing with my middle daughter, and I want to read exactly what she said to me because I thought it was so profound. Mom, I think because we had spent weeks stuffing our disappointment and trying not to think about what we were missing and how sad we were, it was too hard to be surprised into an instant celebration. In my haste and my desire to mitigate their sadness, I had failed to acknowledge the loss. Good motivation, but I'd skipped a step. So that is one piece of my experience that informed my preparation for this training with you. I'm going to encourage you, do the lament work. Set aside the if-onlys and grapple with your losses in order to tentatively begin creating the next steps of your new future. This work is about your emotional intelligence. We develop our emotional intelligence by thinking about our feelings. That sounds kind of funny. Don't I just feel my feelings? No, actually, I need to process and think about what I'm feeling. That creates emotional self-awareness. And really, self-awareness is one of the critical pieces of leadership. And it's a journey, just like the Christian life is a journey. If I'm not aware of the areas in my life that I'm not Christ-like, how can I empty those out in order to make more room for Christ? Similar to emotional intelligence, if I'm not aware of how my emotions are impacting others, how could I make any changes if they were necessary? So let's check back in with Nehemiah and see where he's at. In the latter half of chapter 1, the first part, he did his lamenting, and the next part, he prays a really bold prayer. He confesses personal sin and corporate sin, and then he has the audacity to remind God of what God's promises were to his people, and then he asks for favor from the king. In chapter 2, we see him traveling to Jerusalem, and he really doesn't even tell anyone he's coming or what he's going to do. He just kind of scopes out the situation by himself. And then he addresses the city leaders and his brother with the vision of his desire to rebuild Jerusalem to all that God had intended to be the center of worship for Judah and for his people, where they are going to obey laws and marry and bury and tithe and take care of each other and have festivals. So out of this, we see that part of moving forward is clinging to our vision. What was the original vision of why we're doing this? Just because the circumstances change doesn't mean the vision changes. In fact, it probably shouldn't change. So this is what's tricky. You're a leader, or you were a leader in the past. You knew how to lead. The terrain was familiar, the methods were familiar, even the outcomes were predictable. But now there's nothing predictable. And we still are carrying this kind of emotional container of loss in a discombobulated way, and somehow we're supposed to create a new normal. Way back in 2009, Simon Sinek, who is a kind of a inspirational leadership author and speaker, he gave a very famous, or now famous, TED Talk on how leaders inspire their people. I'll put a link to that talk in your reflection notes. It's one of the most viewed TED Talks of all time, right up there with Brene Brown's talk on vulnerability. So out of that talk, Simon generated an entire curriculum that's useful for understanding your core purposes and your strengths and your approach, both personally and organizationally. He calls it finding your why. So I even made a little diagram for us today. Make sure I get it right side up. So according to Simon, this golden circle, and I hope it's not too glary for you, represents the concentric rings of why we do what we do. In the very innermost circle is your why. That's the emotional driver, that the big purpose of who we are and what we do gets us up in the morning, and we can stay up late at night talking about how awesome it is. I asked Gail for the purpose statement of the Bridge Women's Bible Studies, and here's what she told me. To be a welcoming and safe place for all women to come together in community so they can experience growth and transformation through Bible study. This is your why. It's why you do what you do. You want women to experience growth and transformation. So the next layer out from the why is the how. In your case, growth and transformation, how? Through Bible study. And here's where you see your strengths: teaching and hospitality and evangelism and exhortation and encouragement. Those things are never going to change. Their expression might change, but we're always going to need those gifts when teaching the Bible. So the next layer out is the what. And here is where we're disrupted. The what of doing Bible study in person with lectures and discussion groups and singing and sitting in circles and having snacks and chatting it up. We can't do this, and we're sad and disoriented. We've been doing a form of singing and discussing and teaching in circles and snacking for eons. And now we're being forced to change it up, and we don't like it. We miss each other. It's uncomfortable, and we're having a hard time envisioning what it's going to look like to do it different and how to be successful. When we're forced to change, it's critical that we go back to our why. Why are we doing this anyway? Is it critical we keep doing it? Is it critical we keep offering safe places for women to build community in order to grow and be transformed? 100% yes. Is it critical we use Bible study as one vehicle to do that? Again, 100% yes. Let me tell you a story about a why in our church that COVID changed. Passing the offering plate. It's a ubiquitous part of any church service. You go to any church service on the planet and probably they're going to pass an offering plate in some way. Is it important that we give opportunities for people to give their tithes and offerings? 100% yes. One part of worship is giving. It's part of our why of worship. Is it necessary to take up service time to do that? That's a what. And frankly, that's up for debate. As financial transactions have dramatically changed in the last 2 decades, I don't know about your church, but there's less and less money actually going into the plate as it goes by in the service. It's almost embarrassing to pass the plate because by the time it reaches the back, there's hardly anything in it. As if somehow the contents of the plate is a reflection of our generosity. And we give a special little caveat at the beginning of offering time, saying for guests just to pass the plate on by. This is our regular act of worship. But can't help but thinking about as the plate passes them by and a guest looks in it and goes, "Oh, there's not much there." So when COVID came, even when we are able to gather back together again, even now as we're allowed to gather in services less than 50, with all the touching and handling, there's no way we can pass an offering plate and hope to remain sanitary or physically distanced. So our pastor pulled the plug for good. Done forever, we'll never go back. So far, giving hasn't been impacted, and we do have on-site cash and electronic giving stations. And do we need to include a liturgy of giving still in the service? Yes, we do. Just to remind us, even in our online services, to remind us of why we're giving. But we don't have to pass a plate. So going back to your why, is equipping women to spiritually feed themselves important? Critical. Are we still going to need those gifts to use those gifts of teaching and exhortation and hospitality and encouragement and evangelism? Definitely yes. So if we can tap into our deep commitment to those things, our critical ground level, ground zero purpose, Then we can attend to our emotions with the process of examine. It can provide emotional sustenance even as we lean into the discomfort of change and envisioning a new format to the work that we do. In conclusion, I hope you've heard in this session how to tap into your unchanging mission critical purpose to fuel your motivation. Disruption can force change and how you invite women into growth and transformation. In the book I use for my daily Bible reading and journaling and prayer time, the author puts a hymn at the end of each chapter. And this week was a classic. And I believe it's a perfect reminder to conclude this session. As with many hymns, there are several verses. I'll just read 3 here. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Beneath the shadow of your throne, thy saints have dwelt secure. Sufficient is thine arm alone, and our defense is sure. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, be thou our guide while troubles last, and our eternal home. I've given you some reflection questions again to consider before you meet with your team. I trust they will help you consider your why and get ready to be curious.